Hello, good evening. There's something about the woods that draws us in. Maybe it's the promise of solitude, the thrill of adventure, or the simple beauty of sunlight filtering through ancient trees. But for every peaceful hike or quiet night under the stars, there are stories that remind us the wilderness isn't always empty. Sometimes, the most dangerous thing you can encounter out there isn't a wild animal or a sudden storm. Sometimes it's another person. Tonight, I'll be sharing 10 true stories of terrifying encounters with strangers in the woods. These aren't just tales of the supernatural or the unexplained. These are moments when the presence of another human being turned a simple walk in the forest into a nightmare. So, get comfortable, turn down the lights, and let the darkness take control. Our first story comes from a solo backpacker named Jamie, who set out to hike a remote section of the Pacific Northwest. Jamie had always loved the isolation of the backcountry, the way the world seemed to shrink down to just the sound of her boots on the trail and the wind in the trees. She was 3 days into her trip, miles from the nearest road, when she first noticed the signs. At first, it was just a feeling, an itch between her shoulder blades, the sense that she was being watched. She tried to shake it off, blaming it on nerves and the eerie silence that sometimes settles over the forest. But then she started finding things. A cigarette, but still warm, in the middle of the trail. A boot print, larger than her own, pressed deep into the mud just outside her camp. She hadn't seen another soul since she left the trailhead. That night, as she lay in her tent, she heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the undergrowth just beyond the thin nylon walls. She held her breath, heart pounding, as the steps circled her camp. Whoever it was, they didn't speak. They didn't shine a light. They just walked, slow and steady, around and around, until finally, after what felt like hours, the footsteps faded into the distance. Jamie didn't sleep that night. At first light, she packed up and hiked out, taking a different route than she'd planned. She never saw the stranger, but she never forgot the feeling of being hunted. Our second story comes from a pair of friends, Mark and Tyler, who decided to spend a weekend camping in the deep woods of northern Michigan. They picked a spot far from the main trails, a little clearing beside a cold, clear stream. The first night was uneventful, just the usual sounds of the forest, the crackle of the fire, the distant call of an owl. But on the second night, as they sat by the fire, they heard something moving in the trees. At first, they thought it was a deer, maybe a raccoon. But the footsteps were too heavy, too deliberate. Mark called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no answer. The footsteps stopped, and the woods went silent. They tried to laugh it off, but the uneasy feeling lingered. Later, as they settled into their tent, they heard the footsteps again, closer this time, circling their camp. Then, a low voice, barely more than a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." Mark and Tyler froze. The voice was so close, it could have been right outside the tent. They didn't dare move. The footsteps continued, slow and steady, until finally, they faded away. At dawn, they found a single boot print in the mud, larger than either of theirs, and a crude symbol carved into a tree near their camp. They packed up and left, never looking back. The third story comes from a woman named Rachel, who was hiking alone in the Appalachian Mountains. She'd always felt at home in the woods, but this trip was different. She'd been on the trail for hours when she noticed a man following her. He kept his distance, never getting too close, but every time she stopped, he stopped. Every time she looked back, he was there, just visible through the trees. She tried to lose him, taking side trails and doubling back, but he always reappeared, silent and watchful. As the sun began to set, Rachel's fear grew. She knew she couldn't make it back to her car before dark, so she found a spot to camp, hoping the man would move on. But as she set up her tent, she heard him moving through the brush, closer and closer. She called out, trying to sound confident, but there was no answer. That night, she lay awake, clutching her knife, listening to the sounds of the forest. At some point, she must have drifted off, because she woke to the sound of footsteps right outside her tent. She held her breath, too afraid to move. The footsteps paused, then moved away. In the morning, she found a single, muddy handprint on the outside of her tent. She packed up and hiked out as fast as she could, never looking back. Our fourth story comes from a group of college students who decided to spend spring break camping in a remote part of the Ozarks. They were experienced campers, used to roughing it, but nothing could have prepared them for what happened that night. They'd set up camp near a small lake, spent the evening fishing and telling stories around the fire. As the night wore on, they started to hear strange noises in the woods, snapping branches, the sound of something large moving through the undergrowth. At first, they thought it was just a bear, but then they saw the lights. Flashlights, moving through the trees, weaving in and out of the shadows. The students called out, thinking maybe it was another group of campers, but there was no response. The lights kept moving, getting closer and closer, until they were just beyond the edge of the firelight. Then, suddenly, the lights went out. The woods were silent. The students huddled together, too afraid to move. Hours passed before they finally dared to leave their tent. In the morning, they found strange symbols drawn in the dirt around their camp, and all their food was gone. They packed up and left, vowing never to return. The fifth story comes from a man named Chris, who worked as a park ranger in the Rocky Mountains. Chris had seen his share of strange things in the wilderness: odd lights, unexplained noises, even the occasional lost hiker who swore they'd seen something impossible. But nothing compared to the night he encountered a stranger who seemed to appear out of nowhere. It was late autumn, and Chris was on patrol, checking campsites before the first big snow. Most of the park was empty, the tourists long gone. But as he rounded a bend in the trail, he saw a figure standing in the middle of the path. The man was tall, dressed in old, tattered clothes, his face hidden in shadow. Chris called out, asking if he needed help, but the man didn't respond. He just stood there, silent and unmoving. Chris approached cautiously, hand on his radio, but as he got closer, the man turned and walked into the trees, disappearing without a sound. Chris followed, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no broken branches, nothing. He searched the area for hours, but the man was gone. That night, as Chris sat in his truck, he saw the same figure standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching him. When he got out to confront him, the man vanished into the darkness. Chris never saw him again, but he never forgot the feeling of being watched, even in the emptiest parts of the park. Our sixth story comes from a couple, Anna and David, who decided to spend a weekend camping in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. They found a secluded spot miles from the nearest road, set up their tent, and settled in for a quiet night. As darkness fell, they heard the sound of laughter echoing through the trees. At first, they thought it was another group of campers, but the laughter was strange, high-pitched, almost childlike, but with an edge that made their skin crawl. The laughter grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be coming from all around them. Anna and David huddled together in their tent, listening as the laughter turned to whispers, then to silence. Suddenly, something slammed into the side of their tent, hard enough to knock them over. They scrambled out, shining their flashlights into the darkness, but there was no one there. The woods were silent, the laughter gone. They packed up and left in the middle of the night, driving for hours before they felt safe enough to stop. They never found out who or what was in the woods with them that night. The seventh story comes from a solo hiker named Ben, who was exploring a remote section of the Appalachian Trail. Ben was an experienced outdoorsman, used to spending days alone in the wilderness. But on this trip, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. He'd catch glimpses of movement in the trees, hear footsteps behind him, but every time he turned around, there was nothing there. One night, as he sat by his campfire, he heard a voice whisper his name. He froze, listening, but the voice didn't come again. Later that night, as he lay in his tent, he heard someone, or something, moving around his camp. He stayed perfectly still, listening as the footsteps circled his tent, then moved away. In the morning, he found a single, muddy footprint just outside his tent, and a crude stick figure tied to a tree nearby. Ben packed up and left, hiking for miles before he finally felt safe. He never saw the stranger, but he never forgot the feeling of being hunted. Our eighth story comes from a woman named Lisa, who was camping with her family in a national forest. They'd picked a spot near a river, far from the main campground, hoping for a little peace and quiet. The first night was uneventful, but on the second night, Lisa woke to the sound of someone walking around their camp. She peeked out of her tent and saw a man standing by their fire, staring into the flames. He was dressed in dirty clothes, his face hidden by a hood. Lisa watched as he reached into their cooler, took out a sandwich, and ate it slowly, never looking away from the fire. After a few minutes, he stood up and walked into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. Lisa woke her husband, and together they checked the camp, but the man was gone. In the morning, they found muddy footprints leading away from the camp, but no other sign of the stranger. They reported the incident to the rangers, but no one matching the man's description was ever found. Lisa and her family cut their trip short, leaving the woods behind. The ninth story comes from a group of friends who decided to spend a weekend hiking in the remote forests of Maine. They were experienced hikers, used to rough terrain and unpredictable weather, but nothing could have prepared them for what they encountered. On the second night, as they sat around the fire, they heard the sound of someone singing in the distance. The voice was soft, almost melodic, but there was something off about it, something that made their skin crawl. The singing grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be coming from just beyond the edge of the firelight. The friends called out, but there was no response. The singing stopped, and the woods went silent. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, a woman, dressed in white, her face hidden by her hair. She stood there for a moment, swaying back and forth, before turning and disappearing into the trees. The friends sat in stunned silence, too afraid to move. In the morning, they found strange symbols carved into the trees around their camp, and all their food was gone. They packed up and left, vowing never to return. The 10th and final story comes from a man named Alex, who was hiking alone in the remote forests of Alaska. Alex was an experienced outdoorsman, used to the dangers of the wilderness, but nothing could have prepared him for what he encountered. On the third night of his trip, he woke to the sound of someone, or something, moving around his camp. He peeked out of his tent and saw a figure standing by the fire, staring into the flames. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothes, his face hidden in shadow. Alex watched as the figure reached into his pack, took out a knife, and held it up to the light. The figure turned and looked directly at Alex, his eyes glowing in the firelight. Alex froze, too afraid to move. The figure smiled, then turned and disappeared into the woods. Alex packed up and left at first light, hiking for miles before he finally felt safe. He never saw the stranger again, but he never forgot the feeling of being watched. The woods have always been a place of contrast, a sanctuary for some, a source of dread for others. For every person who finds peace in the hush of the trees, there's another who's felt the cold prickle of fear, the sense that something is just out of sight, watching. These stories aren't just about the strangers themselves, but about the way the forest changes when you realize you're not alone. It's the difference between the comfort of solitude and the terror of isolation, between the beauty of nature and the darkness that can hide within it. After hearing these 10 stories, you might wonder what it is about the woods that draws these encounters out of the shadows. Maybe it's the way the trees muffle sound, turning every footstep into a secret. Maybe it's the way the darkness seems to press in, making even the bravest hiker feel small and vulnerable. Or maybe it's just that, out there, far from help, the rules are different. The woods don't care who you are or what you're running from. They don't care if you're lost or if you're looking for something. They just are. But for those who've had these encounters, the woods are never the same. Take Jamie from our first story. She used to love the feeling of being alone in the wilderness, the sense that she could disappear into the trees and leave the world behind. But after that night, the footsteps circling her tent, the sense of being hunted, she never camped alone again. She still hikes, still loves the forest, but there's always a part of her that's listening for footsteps, watching for movement in the shadows. Mark and Tyler, the friends from Michigan, found their friendship tested in ways they never expected. They'd always joked about the dangers of the woods, bears, wolves, getting lost, but they never imagined the real danger would come from another person. The memory of that voice, whispering just outside their tent, still haunts them. They talk about it sometimes, late at night, when the world feels safe and the woods are far away. But neither of them has been back to that clearing, and neither of them ever will. Rachel, the solo hiker in the Appalachians, learned the hard way that not all dangers can be outrun. She'd always prided herself on her independence, her ability to handle anything the trail could throw at her. But the man who followed her, silent and relentless, changed that. She still hikes, but never alone, and always with a knife close at hand. She tells her story to other hikers, hoping to keep them safe, but she knows that sometimes there's nothing you can do but keep moving and hope for the best. The college students in the Ozarks found out that the woods can be a place of secrets, a place where things happen that no one ever explains. The symbols they found, the lights in the trees, the food that vanished in the night, none of it made sense, and none of it ever will. They left the woods behind, but the memory lingers, a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Chris, the park ranger, still works in the mountains, still patrols the empty trails. But he's never forgotten the man in the tattered clothes, the way he seemed to appear and disappear at will. Chris has seen a lot in his years on the job, but nothing has ever unsettled him like that encounter. He tells himself it was just a lost hiker, maybe someone living off the grid. But deep down, he knows it was something else, something he can't explain. Anna and David, the couple in the Pacific Northwest, found their relationship tested by fear. They'd always thought of the woods as a place to escape, a place to be together without the distractions of the world. But the laughter in the night, the whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, changed that. They still camp, but never so far from civilization, and always with a plan for what to do if something goes wrong. Ben, the solo hiker on the Appalachian Trail, learned that sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't what you see, but what you can't see. The feeling of being followed, the voice that whispered his name, the stick figure tied to a tree, none of it made sense, but all of it felt real. He still hikes, but he's more cautious now, more aware of the things that can go wrong when you're alone in the wilderness. Lisa and her family, camping by the river, learned that the woods don't always offer the peace and quiet you're looking for. The man by the fire, the footprints leading away from camp, the sense of being watched, they left the forest behind, but the memory lingers. Lisa tells her children to be careful, to stay close, to never wander off alone. She knows that sometimes the real danger isn't the animals or the weather, but the people you meet along the way. The friends in Maine, haunted by the singing woman in white, found that some stories are better left untold. They still talk about that night, still wonder who or what they saw. The symbols carved into the trees, the food that vanished, the sense of being watched, they left the woods behind, but the memory follows them, a shadow that never quite fades. And Alex, alone in the forests of Alaska, learned that sometimes the scariest thing you can encounter is another person. The figure by the fire, the knife held up to the light, the eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness. He left the woods behind, but the fear lingers. He still hikes, still loves the wilderness, but there's always a part of him that's looking over his shoulder, listening for footsteps in the night. These stories aren't just about fear, they're about survival, about the way we adapt to the unknown, about the choices we make when faced with danger. They're about the thin line between solitude and isolation, between peace and terror. The woods can be a place of beauty, a place of healing, but they can also be a place of darkness, a place where the rules of the world don't always apply. If you've ever spent a night in the woods, you know how quickly the familiar can become strange. The same trees that seemed welcoming in the daylight become looming shadows after dark. The gentle rustle of leaves turns into something more sinister, every snap of a twig a possible threat. For those who've had close encounters with strangers in the wilderness, these changes aren't just tricks of the mind. They're reminders that the line between safety and danger is thinner than we'd like to believe. It's easy to imagine that the woods are empty, that you're alone with your thoughts and the sounds of nature. But these stories prove otherwise. Sometimes, the most unsettling thing isn't what you see, but what you sense, the feeling of eyes on your back, the certainty that you're not as alone as you thought. It's a primal fear, one that goes back to our earliest ancestors, who knew that the darkness could hide both predator and prey. For Jamie, that fear became a constant companion. She used to relish the solitude of the backcountry, the way the world seemed to fall away with every step deeper into the forest. But after her encounter, she found herself jumping at every sound, scanning the shadows for movement. She started carrying extra gear, pepper spray, a whistle, even a small alarm. She told herself it was just for peace of mind, but she knew the truth. The woods had changed for her, and she would never see them the same way again. Mark and Tyler, once inseparable, found their friendship strained by the memory of that night. They'd always been able to laugh off their fears, to turn every mishap into a story. But the voice in the darkness, the boot print in the mud, the symbol carved into the tree, those were things they couldn't explain away. They tried to talk about it, to make sense of what had happened, but the words always fell short. The fear lingered, unspoken, a shadow between them. Rachel, who had always prided herself on her independence, found herself questioning every decision. She replayed the events of that day over and over in her mind, wondering if she could have done something differently. Should she have confronted the man? Should she have turned back sooner? The questions haunted her, but the answers never came. She learned to trust her instincts, to listen to the voice in her head that told her when something was wrong. It was a hard lesson, but one she would never forget. The college students in the Ozarks tried to move on, to put the strange events of that night behind them. But the symbols in the dirt, the lights in the trees, the food that vanished without a trace, those things stayed with them. They found themselves drawn to stories of the unexplained, searching for answers in folklore and legend. But the more they learned, the more they realized that some mysteries are better left unsolved. Chris, the park ranger, became more cautious in his patrols. He started carrying a flashlight with extra batteries, a radio with a stronger signal. He checked in more often, made sure someone always knew where he was. He told himself it was just good practice, but he knew the truth. The memory of the man in the tattered clothes, the way he seemed to vanish into thin air, had shaken him in a way nothing else ever had. Anna and David, the couple who heard laughter in the night, found themselves growing closer in the aftermath. The fear they'd felt, the way they'd clung to each other in the darkness, became a bond they couldn't break. They talked about what had happened, tried to make sense of the whispers and the laughter, but the answers always eluded them. They learned to trust each other, to rely on their instincts, to never take their safety for granted. Ben, the solo hiker, became more vigilant. He started leaving markers along the trail, making sure he always knew where he was. He carried a whistle, a flare, a small mirror for signaling. He told himself it was just for emergencies, but he knew the truth. The feeling of being followed, the voice that whispered his name, the stick figure tied to a tree, those things had changed him. He still loved the woods, but he respected them in a new way. Lisa and her family became more cautious, too. They started camping closer to established sites, making sure they were never too far from help. Lisa taught her children to be aware of their surroundings, to trust their instincts, to never ignore a feeling of unease. She knew that sometimes the real danger wasn't the animals or the weather, but the people you meet along the way. The friends in Maine, haunted by the singing woman in white, found themselves drawn together by the experience. They talked about it often, trying to make sense of what they'd seen. They researched local legends, looking for answers, but the truth remained elusive. The memory of that night became a story they told at parties, a warning to others who might venture too far into the woods. And Alex, alone in Alaska, found himself changed by the encounter. He became more cautious, more aware of his surroundings. He started carrying a satellite phone, making sure someone always knew where he was. He still loved the wilderness, but he respected its dangers in a new way. The memory of the figure by the fire, the knife held up to the light, the eyes that seemed to glow in the darkness, those things stayed with him, a reminder that the woods are never as empty as they seem. These stories are more than just tales of fear. They're lessons in survival, in resilience, in the power of instinct. They remind us that the woods are a place of beauty and danger, of peace and terror. They teach us to trust our instincts, to be prepared for the unexpected, to never take our safety for granted. And above all, they remind us that sometimes the most terrifying thing you can encounter in the woods isn't a wild animal or a sudden storm. It's another person. The woods have a way of magnifying every emotion. Joy feels brighter, peace feels deeper, and fear becomes something almost tangible. For those who have faced strangers in the wilderness, that fear doesn't fade when the sun comes up or when they return to civilization. It lingers, a shadow that follows them long after the trail ends. Sometimes, it even changes the way they see the world. For Jamie, the memory of that night became a kind of warning. She found herself sharing her story with other hikers, not to scare them, but to remind them to be careful. She joined online forums, posted about her experience, and read the stories of others who had faced similar dangers. She realized she wasn't alone. There were countless others who had felt the same fear, who had seen the same shadows moving just beyond the firelight. The community she found became a source of comfort, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are others who understand. Mark and Tyler, too, found solace in sharing their story. They started attending local hiking groups, talking openly about what had happened. At first, they worried people would laugh, would dismiss their fears as paranoia. But instead, they found understanding. Others had their own stories, strange encounters, unexplained noises, the sense of being watched. The more they talked, the more they realized that the woods are full of secrets, and that sometimes the only way to deal with fear is to face it head on. Rachel, who had always been fiercely independent, found herself reaching out to others for the first time. She joined group hikes, made new friends, and learned to trust again. The experience had shaken her, but it had also made her stronger. She became an advocate for women's safety on the trail, organizing workshops and sharing tips for staying safe in the wilderness. Her story became a source of inspiration, a reminder that even in the face of fear, it's possible to find strength. The college students in the Ozarks, once carefree and adventurous, became more cautious. They started researching the places they planned to visit, checking for reports of strange activity or unexplained events. They learned to trust their instincts, to listen to the little voice that told them when something wasn't right. The experience brought them closer together, forging a bond that would last a lifetime. They still camped, still explored, but they did so with a new sense of respect for the unknown. Chris, the park ranger, became a mentor to younger rangers, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. He taught them to be vigilant, to never take their safety for granted. He emphasized the importance of communication, of always letting someone know where you are and when you'll be back. His experience became part of the training program, a reminder that even the most experienced outdoorsman can be caught off guard. Anna and David, the couple who heard laughter in the night, found that their relationship grew stronger in the aftermath. They learned to rely on each other, to communicate openly about their fears and concerns. The experience taught them the value of preparation, of always having a plan and a backup plan. They became more organized, more thoughtful, and more appreciative of the time they spent together in the woods. Ben, the solo hiker, became a storyteller. He started writing about his experiences, sharing them online and at local events. His story resonated with others, sparking conversations about safety, preparedness, and the importance of trusting your instincts. He found that by sharing his fear, he could help others face their own. Lisa and her family became advocates for outdoor safety. They volunteered with local organizations, teaching children and families how to stay safe in the wilderness. Lisa's story became a staple at safety workshops, a reminder that danger can come from unexpected places. Her children grew up with a healthy respect for the woods, learning to balance curiosity with caution. The friends in Maine, haunted by the singing woman in white, became amateur folklorists. They started researching local legends, collecting stories from other hikers and campers. Their experience became part of the local lore, a story told around campfires and at gatherings. They found that by embracing the mystery, they could make peace with their fear. And Alex, alone in Alaska, found a new sense of purpose. He started volunteering with search and rescue teams, helping others who found themselves in danger. His experience gave him a unique perspective, a deep understanding of the fear that can come from being alone in the wilderness. He became a source of comfort for others, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. These stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They show that even in the face of fear, it's possible to find strength, to build community, and to make a difference. The woods may be full of dangers, but they are also full of beauty, of wonder, and of possibility. For those who have faced strangers in the wilderness, The experience is a reminder that life is unpredictable, that safety is never guaranteed, and that sometimes the only way to move forward is to face your fears and keep walking. The woods are a place of paradox. They offer both escape and confrontation, a chance to leave the world behind and a chance to face what you fear most. For those who have encountered strangers in the wilderness, the experience is never just about the moment itself. It's about what comes after. It's about the way the memory lingers, the way it colors every future trip, every quiet night beneath the trees. It's about the lessons learned, the habits changed, the new sense of vigilance that never quite goes away. For Jamie, the woods became a place of both longing and anxiety. She found herself drawn back, again and again, unable to let go of the peace she once felt there. But every time she set foot on a trail, she felt the weight of that night pressing down on her. She learned to move quietly, to pay attention to the little things, the way the wind shifted, the way the birds fell silent, the way her own heartbeat seemed to echo in the stillness. She became an expert in reading the signs, in trusting her instincts, in knowing when to turn back. The woods had changed her, but they hadn't broken her. Mark and Tyler, too, found themselves changed. Their friendship, once built on laughter and shared adventure, became something deeper, more resilient. They learned to talk about their fears, to support each other in ways they never had before. The memory of that night became a touchstone, a reminder of what they had survived together. They still camped, still explored, but they did so with a new sense of respect for the unknown. They learned to prepare for the worst, to hope for the best, and to never take their safety for granted. Rachel, who had always been self-reliant, discovered the power of community. She found strength in numbers, in the support of others who understood what she had been through. She became a leader, organizing group hikes and safety workshops, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. She learned that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, but a source of strength. The woods had tested her, but she had come out stronger on the other side. The college students in the Ozarks, once carefree and adventurous, became more thoughtful, more deliberate. They learned to research the places they visited, to check for reports of strange activity, to trust their instincts when something felt off. The experience brought them closer together, forging bonds that would last a lifetime. They still sought out adventure, but they did so with a new sense of caution, a new respect for the mysteries of the woods. Chris, the park ranger, became a mentor to others. He shared his story with new rangers, teaching them to be vigilant, to never take their safety for granted. He emphasized the importance of communication, of always letting someone know where you are and when you'll be back. His experience became part of the training program, a reminder that even the most experienced outdoorsman can be caught off guard. He found purpose in helping others, in making sure that no one else had to face what he had faced alone. Anna and David, the couple who heard laughter in the night, found that their relationship grew stronger in the aftermath. They learned to rely on each other, to communicate openly about their fears and concerns. The experience taught them the value of preparation, of always having a plan and a backup plan. They became more organized, more thoughtful, and more appreciative of the time they spent together in the woods. The fear they had felt became a bond, a reminder of what they had survived together. Ben, the solo hiker, became a storyteller. He started writing about his experiences, sharing them online and at local events. His story resonated with others, sparking conversations about safety, preparedness, and the importance of trusting your instincts. He found that by sharing his fear, he could help others face their own. The woods had changed him, but they had also given him a new sense of purpose. Lisa and her family became advocates for outdoor safety. They volunteered with local organizations, teaching children and families how to stay safe in the wilderness. Lisa's story became a staple at safety workshops, a reminder that danger can come from unexpected places. Her children grew up with a healthy respect for the woods, learning to balance curiosity with caution. The experience had changed them, but it had also brought them closer together. The friends in Maine, haunted by the singing woman in white, became amateur folklorists. They started researching local legends, collecting stories from other hikers and campers. Their experience became part of the local lore, a story told around campfires and at gatherings. They found that by embracing the mystery, they could make peace with their fear. The woods had given them a story, and they chose to share it. And Alex, alone in Alaska, found a new sense of purpose. He started volunteering with search and rescue teams, helping others who found themselves in danger. His experience gave him a unique perspective, a deep understanding of the fear that can come from being alone in the wilderness. He became a source of comfort for others, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is hope. These stories are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They show that even in the face of fear, it's possible to find strength, to build community, and to make a difference. The woods may be full of dangers, but they are also full of beauty, of wonder, and of possibility. For those who have faced strangers in the wilderness, the experience is a reminder that life is unpredictable, that safety is never guaranteed, and that sometimes the only way to move forward is to face your fears and keep walking. If there's one thing these stories have in common, it's the way they linger. Long after the tents are packed up and the trails have faded behind, the memories remain, etched into the minds of those who lived them, whispered around campfires, and shared in quiet moments when the world feels just a little too still. The woods, for all their beauty and promise of escape, are never truly empty. They hold our secrets, our fears, and sometimes the shadows of those we meet along the way. For every person who's walked away from an encounter with a stranger in the woods, there's a lesson learned, a new respect for the unpredictability of nature, a deeper understanding of their own instincts, and a reminder that the line between safety and danger is often invisible until it's crossed. The woods don't care about your plans, your experience, or your confidence. They don't care if you're searching for peace or running from something. They simply exist, vast and indifferent, a stage for stories both beautiful and terrifying. But perhaps that's what draws us back again and again. The knowledge that, out there, anything can happen. That every rustle in the undergrowth, every flicker of movement in the shadows, could be the start of a new story. For some, that uncertainty is a source of fear. For others, it's a challenge, a call to test themselves against the unknown, to see what they're made of when the world falls away and all that's left is the sound of their own heartbeat and the whisper of the wind through the trees. The people in these stories, Jamie, Mark, Tyler, Rachel, Chris, Anna, David, Ben, Lisa, Alex, and all the others, are not so different from any of us. They set out looking for adventure, for solitude, for a break from the noise of everyday life. They found all of that and more. They found the edge of their own courage, the limits of their own trust, and the strength to keep moving even when every instinct screamed at them to run. They learned that fear is not always a sign of weakness, but sometimes a signal to pay attention, to trust the gut feeling that something isn't right. And in the end, that's what these encounters are really about, not just the strangers themselves, but the way we respond to them. The choices we make in the face of uncertainty, the way we adapt, survive, and grow. The woods are a mirror, reflecting back our own hopes and fears, our strengths and vulnerabilities. They remind us that we are never as alone as we think, that the world is full of mysteries, and that sometimes the scariest thing we can encounter is another person. But these stories are also about resilience, about the way people come together in the aftermath, sharing their experiences, building communities, and finding comfort in the knowledge that they are not alone. The fear may linger, but so does the strength. The memory of a terrifying night in the woods can become a source of wisdom, a lesson passed down to others, a story that helps someone else stay safe. So, the next time you find yourself deep in the woods, surrounded by the hush of ancient trees and the endless stretch of shadows, remember these stories. Remember the people who faced the unknown and came out the other side. Remember that the woods are a place of both beauty and danger, of peace and terror. And remember that, no matter how alone you may feel, you are part of a long tradition of explorers, adventurers, and survivors who have walked these paths before you. If you ever sense that something is off, if you ever feel the prickle of eyes on your back or hear footsteps where there should be none, trust your instincts. Don't be afraid to turn back, to seek help, to reach out to others. The woods will always be there, waiting, full of stories yet to be told. But your safety, your peace of mind, is worth more than any adventure. And if you have your own story, if you've ever encountered a stranger in the woods, if you've ever felt that chill of fear in the darkness, know that you're not alone. Share your story if you can. Let others learn from your experience. Build the kind of community that turns fear into strength, that transforms isolation into connection. Because in the end, that's what keeps us coming back to the woods. Not just the promise of solitude or the thrill of adventure, but the knowledge that, even in the darkest moments, we are part of something larger. A tapestry of stories, woven together by courage, curiosity, and the unbreakable human spirit. Thank you for joining me tonight, for listening to these stories, and for being part of this community. Whether you're a seasoned hiker or someone who prefers to experience the woods from the safety of your own home, I hope these tales have reminded you of the power of the unknown and the strength that lies within us all. Stay safe out there. Trust your instincts. And remember, sometimes the most terrifying thing in the woods isn't what you can't see, it's what you never expected to find.